Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
It is the moment for reset, and it's when we put meaning behind those words. It's a pleasure to be here, to have this opportunity which we will take to renew the friendship between our countries. That reset, I think, can be meaningful, it can be deep. Obviously, it has to cover the Good Friday Agreement, and I take very seriously our joint role in relation to that.
So that was Keir Starmer speaking during his first visit to Ireland as Prime Minister in September. He promised a reset, and after Ireland's election at the weekend is now the time to press play. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. Welcome to the programme. So the Irish election looks like it'll return a coalition not too different from the last one, bucking a global voting trend so far this year by actually keeping the incumbents in power. And many of the issues in this vote were similar to what we heard in the UK and other campaigns, housing and the cost of living. But Ireland's government is in a very different fiscal position. They've got this huge budget surplus thanks to the surging corporate tax revenues from US tech and pharma firms based there. So we wanted to take a look at this in the context of the often complicated relationship that the UK has with its nearest neighbour.
Yeah, I mean, the land border between the UK, Northern Ireland and Ireland is nearly 500 kilometres long. It's something that became an issue of international importance during the Brexit negotiations. And even if we look just at modern history between these two islands, the relationship has seen its fair shares of ups and downs. Think back to 2011 when Queen Elizabeth went to Ireland. That was a high point in Anglo-Irish relations and seen as being a symbol of how the islands had grown closer with Ireland as an independent country. Then, of course, there was the whole protracted Brexit negotiation periods where less than kind things were said on both sides of the Irish Sea about these neighbours. And we have seen this sort of move with the Windsor framework agreed under Rishi Sunak to try and restore the Northern Ireland Assembly that we saw Stormont get back to business earlier this year. So things have been improving on that front. That's, of course, a very key part of the relationship between Ireland and Britain. And then the question, of course, of a change of government in the UK, bringing in Labour, those positive words that we heard from Keir Starmer then, and a government in Ireland that looks like will have a fairly similar cast of characters to the last one. So these people, the foreign secretaries, the prime ministers will know each other. There'll be familiar faces at least sitting around those tables in those frequent summits that, of course, both countries have as well. So a tricky relationship oftentimes over the years, but one that is very important to both countries. Let's bring in our UK politics correspondent Ellen Milligan and our Dublin reporter Olivia Fletcher for more. Olivia, let's start with you. You've had a very busy weekend. It was only in the early hours of this morning that we actually had the last seat filled in the Dáil, the Irish Parliament. Can you just talk us through, first of all, the election results? Who won, if there is a clear winner, and what will the next government look like?
We have this kind of complicated PR system here. So I feel like you guys in July had it kind of easy in comparison. We only kind of had the full picture yesterday. But it does look, like you say, like returning a similar government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael coming back into government with a smaller partner or a group of independents. And while on the surface, that does kind of look like same old, you know, these two parties were rivals that emerged kind of out of the Civil War, and they've governed Ireland ever since then for 100 years. But even though it's those two parties looking very likely to come back into power, you have this kind of new dynamic where Sinn Féin, kind of this anti-establishment party that runs all Ireland, kind of consolidated itself as a main party this election. Even if they maybe didn't do as well as they liked, it's now clear that Ireland is in a three-party system rather than a two-party system. And that status quo between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael is becoming harder to achieve. And that's kind of tricky for the UK and Ireland to maybe think about, and something that, you know, politicians both sides of the Irish Sea may have to contend with at some point. You know, it's not inevitable, but a lot of people say that kind of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil partnership can't continue forever. You know, Sinn Féin may be able to convince possibly Fianna Fáil to go into government at some point down the line. And why that's so important is because that has quite big implications, because unlike the other main parties in Ireland, Sinn Féin's core tenet really is to reunite the UK's Northern Ireland with the Republic. So same old, but new dynamic as well.
Yeah, indeed. The part that, of course, is going to change is who the other part of that government will be made up by. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were in government with the Greens the last time around. They lost nearly all of their seats. So that is where the leaders of those two parties are now looking for a third wheel, as it were, to try and fill out the majority they'll need in the Dáil. That'll be the change in the next government.
Yeah, well, Ellen, take us across the water then. What's the view from Westminster? What was the state of UK-Irish relations before this election?
Well, Keir Starmer has made it a personal priority, both for himself and his team, to build relations with Ireland. And, his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, is Irish. He's from Cork. And his former Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, spent an awful lot of time in Northern Ireland as working there. And Keir Starmer as well has spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland building up its police force following the Good Friday Agreement. And there's a deep recognition and almost nostalgia that Labour is the party of the Good Friday Agreement. And you've seen, Jonathan Powell, who was one of the architects, be brought back into the government as National Security Advisor just last month. So there's a lot of harking back to the past and pride over that. And as you mentioned, Stephen, Keir Starmer became the first British Prime Minister actually in 5 years to visit Ireland when he visited the Taoiseach in September, where he said he would welcome a new era in the British-Irish relationship. And that's a real change, for example, from the Boris Johnson administration, who very much saw Ireland and Irish politicians and Irish business leaders, warning about the implications of Brexit, saw Ireland as a nuisance, really. And I think there's a political calculation as well as a personal desire here from Labour that actually they can use good relations with Ireland to bridge better relations and closer relations with the EU and kind of, capitalise on that relationship rather than dismiss it.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point, Ellen, because, one of the signs that we've seen of those warming relationships with the EU is Rachel Reeves being invited to the Eurogroup meeting of Euro area finance ministers, invited by Pascal Donoghue, who's the president of Eurogroup and an Irish politician as well. So, are there hopes that could help to accelerate that warming of relations?
Yeah, I think that's a clear example of the diplomatic role Ireland is playing in kind of bringing Britain into the fold again. And Rachel Reeves has accepted that invite and is going to the Eurogroup meeting later this month, the first Chancellor to do so since Brexit, although obviously Britain was never part of the Euro. And but I think it also raises some questions as to, Rachel Reeves, for example, going to Eurogroup, she still has to make this calculation as to, the balance on converging or diverging Britain's financial services industry with the EU, for example. Lizzy did a very good interview with Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, over Labour conference, and he was actually saying that it's an opportunity to diverge from the EU on financial services. So that's a balance that the UK will have to take in all these things. So even though, much warmer, diplomatic, friendly relations, these calculations will still have to be made by the UK.
Oh, well, and you can come again. I thought it was interesting that the Mansion House speech took an opportunity for both the Bank of England governor and for Rachel Reeves to weigh on, really emphasise how much closer ties should be with the European Union when they trailed pretty much everything else. They clearly wanted that to dominate the news lines afterwards. But Olivia, let me put it to you. The UK and Ireland are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement. So that's one area where London and Dublin work together closely already. If the next government is likely to be similar in composition to the last one, should we expect any shift in approach to Northern Ireland policies? Is there prospect for deeper cooperation?
When I speak to people this side of the Irish Sea, and since Ireland's election, the message is basically that there won't be much change and that things should kind of continue on that positive trajectory. So in that sense, it suggests there probably is more room for collaboration. Obviously, they want to continue to uphold the Good Friday Agreement, but there could be more room for shared projects. And of course, just trying to keep Northern Ireland stable as well. There's actually a British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference meeting today. So I'm sure that issue will be touched upon as well. And at some point the UK government, will have to I guess it's kind of tricky for them because the Northern Ireland Secretary of State does work in Northern Ireland, and there you have Sinn Féin and the DUP, but just this dynamic that Sinn Féin is actually becoming a bigger political force on the island. I think that might be something that could add maybe some friction at some point.
I wonder, on that point of friction, Olivia, like where else might there be? Because this all sounds very cordial. It sounds like things are going to be great in British-Irish relations under these governments. What about the competition aspect between the two economies? You know, the London government wants to attract more foreign direct investment, something that Ireland's been very successful at doing. In a Donald Trump world, are they going to be fierce competitors?
In some senses, I mean, you mentioned this at the start as well, but because Ireland is such a hub for multinationals, similar to the UK, Ireland also exports a huge amount of pharmaceuticals and chemicals to the US. So in some ways, there's kind of similar concerns there, and I wonder if maybe that will be an area that they may be able to discuss together because they'll face similar problems. Speaking from this island, there has kind of been some cooperation on the whole FDI pitch. You know, there have been all-island trade missions to the US and Singapore. So I guess it remains to be seen. And of course, we don't know exactly what Trump will do yet, although the issue of tariffs is definitely a big issue for Ireland as well as the UK.
Well, he's definitely the spectre that hangs over pretty much every question that we discuss at the moment. Olivia Fletcher, our Dublin reporter, and Bloomberg UK politics correspondent Ellen Milligan. Really great to get that perspective from both of you. And
it's worth saying as well, the government hasn't been formed in Ireland yet, and there could well be weeks or months of negotiations that happened before that as those two main parties try to court the smaller parties as well. But certainly the message that came out of those larger parties, Fianna, Fáil and Fine Gael, over the weekend was wanting stability. And one of the factors in that is, to your point, Lizzy, about what Donald Trump and the White House could mean, what it could mean for trade relationships, but also for those many US multinationals based in Ireland as well. That's a big risk, this central part of the economy and tax revenues as well. Whereas, you know, the voters very clearly highlighted the issues around housing and cost of living of being most important to them. So there's a tall order to climb for the next government too.
Well, thank you to you both. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo. Our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.